For years, the Kremlin has been imposing a narrative on the world and its own people. According to this narrative, Russia advances, Ukraine resists, but eventually wears down, and time, as always, works in Moscow's favor. However, reports coming from the front lines in the second week of May 2026 are shattering this narrative completely. This is not a local success or a coincidence occurring in a single corner of the map. Along a roughly 100-kilometer stretch from Luhansk to Crimea, the Ukrainian army is applying coordinated pressure on multiple fronts simultaneously. And every point where this pressure is applied exposes a different military, logistical, or psychological weakness of Russia. The front line is not a conveyor belt on which Russia can comfortably absorb Ukrainian territory. On the contrary, the gears are breaking and the belt is beginning to reverse. What I am about to walk you through is not battlefield noise. It is a structured collapse. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Read this carefully before the mainstream catches up. Now, let me examine step by step how the plan Putin claimed was going exactly as planned has actually reached a dead end. The fracture on the map begins in the quietest yet most strategically significant corner of the Eastern Front. On May 12th, Ukrainian armed forces took control of three critical settlements in the direction of Svatove, Kivka, Komazivka, and Kovalovka. These three villages sit approximately 12 kilometers west of Svatove, along a front line near the Kharkiv-Luhansk Oblast border. At first glance, these appear as small dots on the map. In my assessment, they are anything but. These settlements are the key connection points of Russia's main defensive backbone on the Eastern Front. The Svatove-Kremina axis is Russia's most vital supply and defense line in Luhansk. It was the last lifeline the Russian army managed to cling to during the panicked retreat of autumn 2022. Ukraine is now gradually chipping away at the western flank of this vital corridor. Every village recaptured puts additional strain on Russian logistics, forces longer supply routes, and dangerously thins defensive depth. The capture of Kharkivka is particularly significant because it hands Ukraine a potential key to a large-scale advance toward Buva. Behind these advances are several experienced units operating in the Kharkiv and Luhansk directions. According to open-source reports, elements of the 14th Mechanized Brigade and the 92nd Mechanized Brigade, alongside National Guard units, are actively engaged in the region. The tactics reflect what I would describe as the classic Ukrainian combined arms model. Russian positions are first identified and mapped through drone reconnaissance. Artillery suppression follows. Then small infantry groups execute clearance operations. Russia's counter-strategy relies on infiltration attempts by small groups, and Ukraine responds to each with a disciplined hold counterattack cycle. Russian reconnaissance groups advance, Ukrainian drones detect them, coordinated artillery opens fire, and infantry units clear the infiltration points. Low visibility conditions, fog and night operations frequently provide an advantage to Ukraine's small and agile assault groups. Ukraine's pressure around Svatove is not an isolated incident. The same operational model is running in parallel further west. A clear breakthrough occurred on May 10th in the direction of Kupiansk, where Ukrainian forces repelled Russian units that had gathered south of Kruglikivka. Kupiansk is no ordinary city. It is a massive railway junction that Russia has been obsessed with recapturing since its 2022 defeat, spending months and considerable resources in pursuit of that goal. Reporting is also emerging from positions just a few kilometers beyond the city itself. Russian forces had effectively transformed an ordinary residential building into a small fortified strongpoint. Approximately 10 soldiers armed with heavy weapons, positioned to provide mutual crossfire support, were holding the structure. In conventional military terms, such buildings represent some of the deadliest points on any front line. What happened next is, in my view, a defining illustration of where this war is heading technologically. No Ukrainian soldier set foot near that building. Instead, a ground-based robotic system known as the Tor 800, carrying thermobaric rockets, took position. Thermobaric munitions operate on a fundamentally different principle than conventional explosives. The warhead first releases a dense fuel cloud into the surrounding air, then ignites it with intense heat. The resulting pressure wave seeps into every cavity of the structure and evacuates oxygen within seconds. The Lava Battalion, part of the Kartia 2nd Corps, deployed this system to neutralize the strong point. Alongside the Tor-800, explosive-laden kamikaze ground robots and surveillance drones provided aerial attack support. The systems operated as a coordinated network. The thermobaric strike shattered windows, collapsed firing positions, and blew Russian soldiers from their posts. Before they could regroup, kamikaze ground robots entered through collapsed doorways while attack drones dove simultaneously from above. A final robot carrying hundreds of kilograms of explosives reached the center of the building and detonated, triggering a secondary explosion from the ammunition stored in the basement. The building collapsed within seconds. The Lava Regiment documented this operation, conducted in February 2026 and released publicly in May, as the first fully robotic attack of its kind recorded in this war. Turning north of the Kharkiv region, the area around Vovchansk sits just 5 to 6 kilometers from the Russian border. During April and May 2026, the Ukrainian army turned Russia's much-discussed buffer zone concept on its head in this sector. The 23rd Assault Battalion, part of the elite Kartia 2nd Corps of the Ukrainian National Guard, conducted a coordinated assault operation in one of the most demanding sectors on the entire front. Assault groups rapidly breached Russia's first line of contact, clearing forward defensive positions and dismantling large company-level fortifications. The village of Zaporizhzhia came under Ukrainian control, and units advanced into the dense forested area to its north. This matters more than it might initially appear. Zaporizhzhia sits just 4 to 5 kilometers from the Russian border. Clearing forested terrain is consistently underestimated in public analysis, but the ground reality is entirely different. Every tree is a potential shelter, every thicket a possible ambush point, every ditch a concealed minefield. Russia had treated these forests as a natural fortress. Ukrainian forces uprooted them from within it. During the same period, the village of Vilhi was cleared, and strategic positions southeast of Vovchansk were recaptured. Operational records also indicate that experienced foreign volunteers from Latin America participated in these operations. The significance of this loss for Russia goes beyond territory. Moscow had not deployed ordinary troops here. The 69th Motorized Infantry Division, Akhmat Chechen units, and various heavy assault brigades were committed to this sector. The stated objective was to push into Kharkiv via Vovchansk and thereby establish a buffer zone protecting Belgorod from Ukrainian rocket strikes. A Chechen success here was vital to Putin's propaganda of a multinational, invincible fighting force. Reality did not align with the Kremlin script. They failed to break through Ukrainian defensive lines and were pushed into a full defensive posture. The prevailing sentiment among Russian soldiers in the sector reflects what I consider the most dangerous stage of a military morale collapse. We are constantly attacking, constantly losing people, and gaining nothing. Moving south, a far more extensive transformation has unfolded on the Zaporizhzhia front. In January and February 2026, Russian forces carried out deep incursions toward Veselanka and Nova Kakhovka, with the clear objective of encircling Orikhiv and applying heavy pressure on Zaporizhzhia city from the north. Kremlin-aligned media was framing these incursions as a triumph of buffer zone operations. The Ukrainian General Staff responded with a precise repositioning. The 153rd Mechanized Brigade was withdrawn from the Kherson region and shifted directly to the Mali-Sherbaki axis to reinforce the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade already operating there. The decisive blow, however, came from the direction of Svatove. Counterattacks were conducted by elite units including the Timur Special Forces Unit, affiliated with Ukrainian military intelligence and elements of the International Legion, in what amounted to a ghost operation. The outcome was a comprehensive defeat for Russian commanders. Since January 2026, Ukraine has liberated approximately 65 square kilometers of critical territory in the Zaporizhzhia direction alone. Svatove, just 25 kilometers south of Zaporizhzhia city, was the central node in Russia's dream of advancing northward. That area is now largely under Ukrainian control. What did Russia sacrifice to contest this ground? The 7th, 98th, and 104th Airborne Divisions, the 11th Airborne Brigade, and the 19th and 42nd Motorized Infantry Divisions of the 58th Combined Arms Army were all committed to this sector. VDV units represent the Russian Army's most elite, best trained, and most prestigious soldiers. In March and April, the 299th Airborne Regiment attached to the 98th VDV Division and the reserve forces of the 7th Air Assault Division were urgently redeployed from Kherson to reinforce the effort. Despite this concentration of elite force, Russia has failed to regain the initiative. Ukraine's dynamic defensive cycle of hold, counterattack, and fortify is grinding down every Russian assault with methodical efficiency. These successes were not achieved through luck. A detailed field report published by the Kyiv Independent reveals the new face of modern warfare as it is actually being practiced. This major counteroffensive operation along the Zaporizhzhia-Dnipropetrovsk border was conducted with a level of secrecy that I find genuinely remarkable given the surveillance environment. According to a commander from the 148th Artillery Brigade, out of a unit of over 2,000 soldiers, only 10 were aware of the full scope of the assault. In an era where hundreds of drones fill the sky and every trench vehicle and movement is monitored around the clock, maintaining that level of operational compartmentalization is a genuine military masterstroke. The preparation phase focused on completely blinding and paralyzing Russian artillery. Along a 30-kilometer stretch between Zhulipol and Berezove, approximately 150 Russian artillery units were precisely identified and systematically engaged with drones and precision-guided munitions before a single Ukrainian infantryman moved. Even fog was weaponized as camouflage cover. The most striking element, however, was what I would call the psychological blindness of the war. Ukrainian commanders noted that Russian units on the front line believed the initiative was still theirs until Ukrainian assault groups appeared directly behind their own positions. Having drones in the sky means seeing everything, yes, but seeing everything does not mean understanding what you are seeing. Russia looked and could not comprehend what Ukraine was preparing. The territorial gains are merely the visible surface. Wars are not won solely in trenches. They are won or lost on logistics lines, in warehouses, and along supply routes. Ukraine is now delivering pressure precisely there, against the very circulatory system sustaining Russian operations. Ukrainian forces have brought critical sections of the M14 highway, Russia's most vital overland artery leading to Crimea, under fire control. Fire control, it is worth clarifying, does not mean physical occupation. It means the capacity to strike ammunition convoys traversing the highway at any moment, paralyzing logistics, and instilling a constant threat of death for every Russian driver using the road. For Russia, this constitutes a serious operational problem. Crimea functions as a massive forward military base, and there are only two primary arteries to supply it: the M14 highway and the Kerch Bridge. By establishing fire superiority over the M14, Ukraine is effectively severing one of those arteries. The Kerch Bridge, meanwhile, is already heavily damaged from previous strikes and operating well below capacity. When the M14 is effectively paralyzed, the entire logistical burden falls on that fragile structure, and a supply chain dependent on a single route is a chain approaching collapse. The Institute for the Study of War's May 9th assessment confirmed this strategic development explicitly. Ukrainian forces are delivering devastating strikes 100 kilometers deep into areas Russia had, until recently considered its entirely secure rear. The myth of a safe Russian land bridge is over. On Russian military telegram channels, there is a palpable atmosphere of panic. Ukraine's Hornet series drones are shredding fuel tankers, supply trucks, and critical transportation corridors deep behind the front lines. A logistics network does not require total destruction to collapse. Delayed shipments, convoys rerouted under pressure, and soldiers pulled from frontline duties to secure roads are all steadily degrading the Russian operational tempo. The targeting extends beyond roads to their final destinations. On the night of May 5th to 6th, Ukraine struck deep inside occupied Crimea, hitting Jankoy. An S-400 air defense launcher worth hundreds of millions of dollars and 2 mobile fire groups were destroyed. The more consequential strike, however, landed on the Jankoy railway station, Crimea's largest and most critical rail junction. It is the central hub through which military trains entering via the Kerch Bridge are distributed toward Sevastopol and Simferopol. A single destroyed locomotive or a handful of damaged rail cars here translates into days of delay for ammunition destined for frontline Russian troops. The sustained drone campaign across the Crimean Peninsula is demonstrating systematically that Ukraine is capable of penetrating the Russian air defense network with increasing regularity. Behind all of these frontline developments lies an attrition dynamic that Russia is structurally unable to compensate for. During the April to May 2026 period, the Russian army suffered devastating personnel and equipment losses as the spring offensive stalled against Ukrainian drone and artillery superiority. According to daily reports from the Ukrainian General Staff, Russian casualties averaged between 1,900 and 1,400 soldiers per day across these 2 months, with peaks reaching 1,420 on individual days. In March 2026, monthly losses reached approximately 35,000, among the highest figures recorded since the war began. As of early May, total Russian personnel losses had reached an estimated 1.33 to 1.34 million. Independent Russian sources Meduza and Mediazona, cited in ISW reporting, document at least 352,000 confirmed Russian deaths between February 2022 and the end of 2025. Western intelligence estimates place total losses at approximately 1.3 million as of February 2026. Russia is still attacking, but the cost of each attack is rising while the territorial return is diminishing. What will ultimately determine the outcome of this war is not who can field more troops, but who can replace losses faster and sustain operational coherence under that pressure. In that race, based on everything the data shows, Russia is falling behind. If this breakdown changed how you see the front line, share it with someone who is still reading headlines. And if you want analysis that goes beyond the map and into the mechanics of how wars are actually won and lost, follow along. There is considerably more to unpack.